This is a Google Spreadsheet. This is my Emacs and a bit of Clojure code. And when I'm executing this one here, the data gets filled in, and actually the data gets filled in here and is then used for the chart. So I can repeat it over here. And yeah, the Clojure code is using the Google Sheets API to do this. This will be part of an internal dashboard that will show different business metrics, and also this is kind of related to the user experience, so how long the people have to wait until one of our worker servers on Streeter.com will have the capacity to pick up the story post and execute it. Here their maximum story post waiting time. Another factor leads to these huge spikes, so this calculation still have to be corrected. But last week I already increased or doubled the size, the amount of threads on the workers, and we already see here some improvements. Normally we could also use our monitoring system to ingest the data there and get similar graphs like this one, but it doesn't make a ton of sense if we have this data already in the database and can just make a atomic query and fill in the data here, because for the monitoring stuff I would have to add another monitoring metric, and the system also only keeps them around for 30 days. And I also like to look at other business related stuff which may come from other APIs where it makes even less sense to ingest this into the monitoring system. And yeah, actually let's take a look at a little bit smaller example. Therefore I have here the sheet 1, and yeah, here I can just execute this one, and it fills in here the rows hello world, and here it used a random integer so that we see a change every time we execute this. And yeah, actually the Google APIs are pretty nice, and they are REST APIs, and the endpoint I'm using here is the values batch update. And here you see, okay, it should be a post request, and here's a placeholder for the spreadsheet ID, and I'm filling in here with format. And yeah, all the other stuff is explained, like the value input option. So there's the option to just say interpret this as raw data, and nothing will change on the data. And if you say user enter, it will also try to parse it and also keep your formatting. And yeah, the data thing is here also the range. So in this example, we're replacing this range here, or as you will see, the whole sheet in this case. And this data is passed over here, so that's yeah, where we replace the complete spreadsheet, and here are the values. So everything pretty straightforward. So the all scopes here and the authentication are pretty more complicated, I guess. No. Sometimes here you also find the scopes that you will need to access this data. But as I said, the authentication is pretty complex, despite the fact that I'm doing this since a few years with Google Cloud and so on. It's still sometimes challenging to find out how to do this exactly, and that's why I also will not go into detail here in this video. Maybe I create another video for it, but Let me show you shortly this library that I wrote a few years ago. And from the perspective of the Clojure part, it's pretty straightforward because all the stuff which is related to Google Cloud authentication, also authentication for other Google APIs you like to use from your own system. It's done by this class, and here the application default credentials, they figured out how to get the access token when you're running on a Google Cloud instance, or also when you're running your local development environment using the Google Cloud SDK. And yeah, but as I said, from the Clojure perspective, it's pretty straightforward, because as soon as you have the access token, then you just have to add the authorization header here and a bearer token, in which case it's just the access token. And yeah, then you're done. Then the request is already authenticated. And yeah, I'm using here the create client, and you don't really have to use here the impersonate stuff when you're running on Google Cloud, but that was the complex part for getting it running without downloading any service account credentials and so on to your local machine. Yeah, that was the complex part for the local development. But yeah, it's pretty nice to write straight away, inject the data here in Google Spreadsheets, because there's also an option, for example, so that you import the data from an URL that could be your app server, and when it returns in the CSV, Google Cloud, or in this case Spreadsheet, will also create, I guess, every half an hour or 5 minutes, I don't remember. But the problem is local development gets then way more complicated, because you have to expose your local host via ngrok, for example, change the URLs. And yeah, it's at least for my use case, it was way more straightforward to just store the data inside the Google Spreadsheet.